All right, guys. So I got sent this video. Um, it's on Jubilee. My cousin actually sent it to me. It's about trans women having a discussion with conservative women. It's actually very interesting. I stopped watching it and decided to go live and watch it. Have a reaction with all of you guys. So, with that being said, let's continue watching this, or let's start it over and watch this. Pretty interesting.
A white person, and I said I want to transition into a Black person. And I'm redefining what Blackness is.
Indoctrinating our youth. Step forward if you agree. The transgender movement is indoctrinating our youth.
Of course, they indoctrinating the youth.
We are seeing, especially on social media, on TikTok, you're seeing a lot of people in this community really just targeting children. And you're seeing drag shows, even in conservative states like Texas, and even just media, movies. Like, it seems like everything seems to be targeted at these kids. You have drag story hour for kids, and it's just really, I think, predatory in a way. And I'm not saying every trans person is doing this, but as a whole, there does seem to be a route that they're taking to get to the kids.
When you hear Blue's Clues playing in the next room, and then you hear the Gay Parade song, it's Blue's Clues. You're not expecting to be talking to the children about that. Yeah. It really makes you wonder, are they really coming for the children?
And I think we see in our population now, the rate of young children who are identifying as transgender, non-binary is skyrocketing. And I think there's something to be said for people who are truly experiencing gender dysphoria, which we recognize exists, and those who are experiencing what is now going to be called, or in the future going to be called, this social contagion gender dysphoria, where they're being exposed to it on social media or in school, or mom and dad are having a conversation about it with children, and children are now starting to develop gender confusion.
Or even babies, right? People who are being born, they don't have to put the gender on the birth certificate, and they're saying you can choose whatever you want to be. Like, that's so dangerous. And even lying to them, saying like, oh, if we put you on hormone blockers at this age, it won't do anything to your puberty, it won't affect you long term. And it's just a straight up lie. And there's like an entire Reddit thread dedicated to people who transitioned, talking about how much they hate their life now because they transitioned as a child, and now they amputated off healthy body parts and are miserable.
All right. Can the disagreeer step forward?
The fact that the trans movement has got people shook has me so excited. The trans movement is not indoctrinating our youth. Our youth are understanding who they are at a younger age. And from what I was hearing over here is a lot of what y'all were saying, I wonder would you say it to the parents? Because we need to really look at what the parents of trans youth really go through. Trans youth, instead of them enjoying their life, playing with their friends, they're up in legislation trying to fight for basic rights here. 1 in 5 transgender youth have tried to commit suicide. Why are we trying to police them?
But you're bringing it only to the parents. The question was indoctrination in general, am I correct? And then,
but they're a part of that conversation. Someone said something about drag shows coming to schools or whatnot. The kids enjoyed it. The parents just had a problem with it. But that's their issue. It's only someone dressed.
The kids enjoy drag coming to the schools, is what he's saying. Because this make no mistake. That's a drag. That's a trans woman, which means a biological man. So he's saying the kids enjoy it. The kids don't know better. You got drags coming in these schools. You got drags coming in these, even in churches, which leads me to believe that they're being paid to do this, which means there's a higher elite system that is trying to purposely indoctrinate the children. Yes, that's going on.
In drag, reading a story.
That could have been anybody. Blackface for women. I see it as a caricature of womanhood.
But inherently sexual as well.
I have to agree with you guys. I do not like the drag queen social hours. I personally, as a trans person, didn't ever go to a drag show until I was about 40. I'm not for the sexualization of kids. Why are we not letting kids be kids and bringing sex into their life so early?
I think it's predatory in general to talk about sex with children,
Yeah.
regardless straight sex, any kind of sex.
Who's teaching sex to third grade children? I really want to know.
Have you looked at
There's
the California curriculum for sex education?
Everywhere.
You need to.
I know that when I was in preschool, I got my first crush on a boy because to me at the time, he was in kindergarten, he looked like Prince Eric from
Little Mermaid.
Yeah, Little Mermaid. I don't think like fucking him ever crossed my mind when I was 4, but obviously like it would have been good to know that like it's okay, like if you have these feelings for someone of the same sex.
When we think of youth in general, they're having sex at a lot younger age, whether we like it or not. Let's just keep it 100%
You don't think it's
real.
because of that?
I do not think it's because of that. It starts at home with parents teaching their children, because one or two things is going to happen. Either you teach your children or the world is going to teach your kids. That's the reality of it.
They are learning about it at younger ages from some adult or even their peers who learned about it from adults. That is in definition indoctrination. As a mother and seeing what my children are going to have to be introduced to at such a young age, like I didn't even know what a gay person was till I was like 12. And so they're going to be having these really heavy adult conversations at a really young age just because of their exposure. And that is honestly just scary because I don't want to have those conversations. That's why I will be homeschooling my kids because I do believe it is my responsibility to protect them and shield them from the outside world, which is targeting children.
That's why a lot of parents homeschool their kids nowadays, because a lot of these schools are indoctrinating children. It's clearly out there. It's even all over the internet. It's showing these things. They're trying to get these kids pronouns and saying they can be called what they want to be called. When I grew up, teachers telling us you can be whatever you want to be was had a whole different meaning.
The trans community and the trans movement is really shaking the course of what people think gender identity is supposed to be.
So in one sentence, you're saying that you guys are not responsible for the indoctrination that's currently happening with
Absolutely
children.
not.
And in the second sentence, you are saying we are shook by the fact that you are responsible for it.
No, you are shook at the fact that the trans movement has become what it is.
A movement that influences people
Powerful-
all over the world, and particularly children. And we see it in the fact that the number of young people identifying as transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, genderqueer is skyrocketing, which means that children are being exposed to these ideas. And it's certainly coming from institutions like the media, like Hollywood, like our public institutions and schools. So to say that that is not happening or to deny that that is the reality negates the numbers that we're seeing.
What I would say is that the idea that there is a single transgender movement and ideology is disingenuous, and that at its core, being transgender is about separating sex from sex roles and gender roles that are compulsory.
Do you think that children should be able to transition medically?
No,
I think
no.
it just really depends on each individual situation. They should be able to make the best medical decision for them.
A child should be able to make. Did you hear what this man just said? A child should be able to make the best medical decision for them. A child. Someone who can't even pick their own bedtime should be able to make the best decision for them. So if they want to change genders like Wade's son, they should be able to do it because, it's what they want to do. Mind blown.
I am comfortable sharing bathrooms with the other side.
Recordings just got back.
So let me get this straight. They're saying if children, the next question should have been how young are we talking? That should have been the next question. Because somebody like that, you continue to say something, they're going to continue to go on it because they're trying to prove their point instead of coming into a place where they have moral value. They rather prove their point on emotions instead of What's logical, right? Continue this.
Yes, I feel comfortable. Safe, that might be a different question, but comfortable, yes, I feel comfortable.
What I think the bathroom issue opens up is an issue of predatory men taking advantage of the opening. That now they could walk into a women's bathroom or a women's locker room, as we've seen happen in instances like here in Los Angeles at We Spa. And they go into a women's space, they expose themselves to the women, and then they say, well, I'm a trans woman, and you've opened up.
In case you guys don't know what happened at We Spa, I believe she's talking about the altercation that took place in LA, where a lady was in the spa and there was children in there, I believe, and a trans woman who was a biological man came in there naked, junk swinging, and then the lady made a scene about it. And then the next day, I believe they had a protest with the next week or something like that. They had a protest where all kind of trans and Antifa members came out and started bullying people. Just because that lady made a scene because there was a man in the women's side of the spa, naked, where children were seeing this. But no, it should be okay because, you know, that man identified as a woman. So he should be able to go into the women's side of the spa fully naked, no matter if little girls are in there or not.
This space for me.
But we cannot blame trans people for that. And
Nobody's blaming you.
That's the problem right here. Because again, when you walk into the bathroom, I'm not interested in knowing what you are, what you identify as. I'm trying to use the bathroom and leave out of there. What people have tried to say is that when trans women go into the bathroom, they're being predatory, and that is not the case. That is something we do not blame on trans women. Although you were not saying that, when we talk about predatory behavior and when we talk about like the predatory cases, none of them have been trans women. So I just want to make sure, I know she's not strictly doing that, but because she said that, I think it's very important that I bring that out on the table and discuss that.
We have to have the conversation. Now I'll open up the question. We know that if this legislation happens, if we move forward with this move, there are going to be men who take advantage of it. Now, I want to ask you, is your comfort as far as going to the bathroom more important than the female women that will be victimized by this?
Who said female women will be victimized by this?
They will and they have.
No, you're only assuming, but the reality
I'm not
of it is,
assuming.
again, when people are going into the restroom, when people are only going into the restroom,
She's only assuming. She's the lady in this situation, and he's the man, trans woman man. But she's only assuming. No, you're just making that stuff up. You're completely just, you're oblivious to what's really going on. No, I think that's actually, there needs to be a mirror right here for him to see himself. He's not even thinking about what's going on in these other people's minds or these other people's heads. Only what he wants to hear and what he wants to believe. Clearly,
restroom, they're only focused on doing one or two things, and that's using the restroom.
Yeah.
But you didn't answer the question. Is your comfort more important than the female people who could be victimized by this?
Okay, so let me help her answer the question. Which one do you think I'm going to get the kicked out of me in? It wasn't the women's restroom. The issue that you're bringing up, first of all, is already violating a whole bunch of laws. Okay, if somebody's exposing themselves in a bathroom, that's a whole different environment rather than just letting trans people in. In California, it's right now 100% legal for trans people to go use the bathroom of their choice. So I don't know what law you're talking about.
You're asking this question as if I would not stand up for cis women that were in the restroom, and that's not the case. Nice dodge there.
No
but
dodging.
The reality of it is, one thing I'm noticing is we're reducing a lot of these particular conversations to genitalia. And it's not about genitalia, it's about safety.
Yeah, her concern is the possibility of predation, and that's still a probability. It doesn't matter if trans people are using the restroom or not.
Sure.
But what you're concerned about is that you're possibly that people feel more emboldened to put on women's clothes and go in the bathroom, but they're still violating the law all over the place if that's the purpose that they're going in for.
Yeah, so I didn't step forward because, and I know in today's age, this is going to sound very radical and, but I don't agree with the whole transgender ideology. And so for me, it's encouraging something that is based in what I feel is delusion. And so I don't think that we should be encouraging that by allowing men into women's restrooms.
I think they all believe that it's there's a sense of delusion there. But I believe they all believe that, but she was the one who actually came out and said that. That blatant. That's what I believe.
Gender is delusion. If we're looking at historically anywhere from, midwives after the enclosure of the commons in the 1400s, having their whole trade affected, or Brewsters having their trade affected. And now we don't think of women as, Brewsters, or that creating beer is a womanly thing. These all came from social conditions. These all came, a lot of gender, regardless of biological sex, it didn't like naturally flow out of our genitals. And like, it was like, we're like, this is how my genitals are. So this is like how my gender is going to be. That didn't happen. That's not like are either transgender or who are LGBT in general. All my friends were girls. At first, I just remember there were a lot of things where like I would kind of like come up against.
This, man, I don't, you shouldn't even be upset with people like this, because the problem is people like this don't understand that they have spirits on them. Spirits cling to people. You know what I mean? And as we're growing up, a lot of times people don't know God. They don't know how to become free from being held captive of sin. So they end up coming into agreement with what the spirit is influencing. So, it's not really about getting mad at these people. It's about really just about, trying to lead these people to the Lord. If you really, really want to be honest.
People telling me that that's wrong, like that whether it's something I like, something I want to do. It wasn't until kindergarten that like someone told me that I'm a boy, and I was like, oh, I don't feel comfortable going to any bathroom in this world, like in the current society we live in. And to make trans women the whipping girls of that, I think that's disingenuous, but I do think that we need a systemic change to make ourselves safer. I don't really know anyone who doesn't feel a little bit uncomfortable going to the bathroom.
And trans people are not a delusion. Let's make it very clear. We're here.
Oh,
we've been here for ages. We've been here since
Here
the
you
beginning
go.
of time. We're in your history books. And I think it's very disingenuous to say that a whole identity is a delusion.
I believe that you feel like women. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there is an objective truth, and I don't believe in his truth, her truth, their truth, my truth. Like, there is truth, and
Who defined
It's
it?
emotion.
and like it's already defined. And I, as a Christian, I believe God is the one who set truth.
Oh,
Who
here we go.
defined
Is
that?
the truth.
Can you tell me who defined that?
God.
Living in the Bible Belt with religion taking center stage, it's hard for a lot of trans and non-binary folks like myself to really be able to express who they are. I had to really take on my gender dysphoria in private. I couldn't talk to my mom about it. I couldn't talk to my dad, my siblings, because ultimately I felt like it wasn't going to lead to anything, because there wasn't a lot of education in the cis community like there is in the trans and non-binary community. We're talking about a book that was written by man with his own bias.
Who created chromosomes?
Yeah, I'm
But then
personally
there's
not
also-
religious, and I believe in
But we're
science.
also- when we talk about chromosomes, it goes back to the conversation we were talking about earlier about being intersex.
But we're not talking about intersex. We're talking about people who were born as a male and they try to transition. The whole fact that they're trying to transition into a female in the first place shows that they aren't actually that, or else there would be no need to transition, right? So you say, okay, I feel like a woman. What is that? What does that feel like?
Yeah, how does
And
that
how do you know?
I'm not saying I feel like a woman. I am a woman.
So then why did you transition? Why can't you just present as a man but be a woman?
I transitioned so I could be who I was. I did not feel like I was the person that I identified with when I was born. So I took the steps to align my outside body with how I feel on the inside? What makes you stand up every day and make you identify as a woman? Let me challenge you on that.
I am a woman, and I don't like being called a cis woman because I'm not a cis woman. I'm a woman. I'm not a birthing person. I'm a mother.
So get mad at the terminology, not at trans people.
It's your new terminology.
But this is what I notice a lot of cis women do. The terminology has been around for so long. Cis is a prefix. Cis means same. Instead of getting mad at trans and non-binary people for using updated terminology, get mad at Webster. You're not going along with the times and being educated on the different pronouns and the different identities.
You have to admit, some of the pronouns are kind of ridiculous. I mean,
usually
to be,
they-
with all due respect, I mean, you I'm sure you have to agree some of the pronouns.
I
people
don't think
use.
they're ridiculous. I think they're very expansive. Trans and non-binary people just want you to respect their chosen pronoun. We are not trying to force pronouns on you. Just understand that the terminology is going to continue to grow. If you're willing to educate yourself and understand, then you've got it.
The ability to give birth is a woman's greatest strength. Can the disagreeer step forward?
So what the guy was pretty much saying was pronouns aren't ridiculous, they're just expansive. So what about the people who are calling themselves dogs and wolves? Is what I want to know. Are the people who call themselves invisible? These are the kind of questions I'd be asking on here. Because there's really people out there who call themselves animals. And then when a person like that says, well, yeah, they should be called an animal then. If they identify as a dog, they're a dog. Okay, well, if that's the case, what if they want to marry a dog? Well, if they want to marry a dog, they can marry a dog. Okay, well, that's where bestiality comes in. Oh, well, that's what you want to call it, but we call it blah, blah. Then you come to a point where, okay, well, what if they identify as a kid? Well, if they identify as a kid, they want to wear Pampers, let them do that. What if a kid identifies as an adult? Well, if they want to identify as an adult, let them do that. Okay, well, where does pedophilia step in if they want to be together? Well, we don't call that pedophilia. We call that minor attracted people. Nonsense. Nonsense. Bridget said I identify as being rich. Okay, Brittany just said I identify as being rich. It just brought to my head, like, if this is the case, you should be able to walk into people's homes and say I identify. You should be able to walk into Will Smith's home. And then when they try to kick you out, say, what are you talking about? I identify as Will Smith. This is my house. Those are my cars. Let me in, Jada. If you want to go into that.
One of the things that I regret was the fact that I would never be able to do that, but honored in the ability to participate it from the other side. Women are amazing. They don't just deal with that. So
While giving birth is not a woman's greatest strength, I do think that only biological women are capable of going through that process and bringing life into the world.
I need to push back on that because we're also forgetting that trans men and trans masculine people can also give birth as well. And I don't think it's fair to just set it on one group that says that just biological women have that power to just give birth.
You gotta be kidding me. He said, well, trans men can give birth too. So I don't think we should be saying only biological women can give birth. Trans men are biological women. Lord have mercy. Oh my goodness. You got to be strong mentally to watch something like this because you need medication. calm your nerves. This is crazy.
And we have to be very clear when we look at the nuances of birth.
I recognize that there are people who have different identities. There are biological women who identify as men and then go on to give birth. I would argue, however, that those people are still biological women. And I know that is something
You know
that can
what?
offend many, but that stands as my belief.
So the correct term is actually
Going off what Shelly just said, she said this is disrespectful to women. This is very disrespectful to women because, listen, I have so much respect for women. You know what I mean? I was raised by a woman, you know, and you see the strength in women. You see the things that women go through. You see, you know, all kind of different things that women deal with. And for a man to just come out of nowhere and say, you know what? I want to be a woman today. Put on a wig and say, yo, that's what Dylan Mulvaney did. First day of being a woman, second day of being a woman. Now he's like one of the most famous transgenders in the world. He hasn't even been a woman for a year yet. But he could just put on a costume, say he's a woman, and then automatically become one. You had Caitlyn Jenner win Woman of the Year in 2015. How disrespectful. Yes, it's very disrespectful. Very disrespectful. It's really queens out here, and yet you got men trying to transform and say that they're queens. No, I'm not going with it. I respect people. I love people because I love souls. I know that as children of God, we need to get souls into the kingdom, get them out of this delusion, first of all. But we're not going to do that as long as we continue to enable their delusion. And the further we go into that, the more they're going to want because it's not them. It's what's on them.
actually cisgendered woman. Cis means same. It means that you identify with the birth that you were assigned. And so, you know, I just really, really wish that we would kind of be a little bit more mutable to the terminology, because I think that's what really is going to open up that dialogue and that discussion.
If I may, I think the crux of the conversation kind of comes back to are trans women women? And I think if we don't agree there, it's going to be very difficult to kind of keep the conversation going or even agree on the points that you guys are talking about, because if we don't believe that trans women are women, then the conversation kind of ends there in terms of whether they're like men can give birth or not, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure that's the case. I feel like the ability to give birth is not like the end all be all of a woman's like meaning and life and herself and her personality. And
No, it's not the end all be all, sir, but it's definitely something that trans women can't do. That's for sure. You find me, listen, Linda, you find me one trans woman that has given birth. One.
I think that if you can acknowledge that, I would also then maybe challenge the idea that womanhood, as opposed to like a female sex, like womanhood is a consistent thing that has always been one way.
So how would you define womanhood?
You sound like Matt Walsh.
It's a good question.
Womanhood, to me, is about standing in integrity. It is about being confident in who you are. And me as a Black trans woman should not be a threat to you. And what I see from a lot of cisgender women is they're trying to deem what womanhood is supposed to look like. I have my own perspective of womanhood. We can coexist in the same world, but the reality is we get so stuck on parts. Having a vagina is not the only thing that makes you a woman. I'm sorry. It takes integrity, it takes courage, it takes lifting other women up. It takes those things to begin to defy womanhood. And there's so many other different things.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, so if I were a white person and I said Blackness is about integrity and courage and kind of the same thing that you used to
Okay.
define womanhood, and then I said I want to transition into a Black person and I'm white,
Mhm.
And I'm redefining what Blackness is to fit what
Yeah.
I view it as, right? There's no objective reality of what Blackness is. Would you consider that appropriation, or do you think that's something I should be allowed to do?
I consider that dodging, and I consider that comparing apples to oranges, because race and gender identity are two separate different things. Because when we look at race, we have to look at many, many different structures of what whiteness and white supremacy looks like, and how white supremacy can be manipulated into other things.
Actually, you can actually be biracial, right? First of all, don't even get me going on the whole race thing. We all come from Adam and Eve. You get what I'm saying? All of our grandparents are the same. So the whole racism thing just blows my mind anyway, but that's a different topic for a different time. You can't be man and a woman, but you can be biracial. So whatever point he's about to try to prove right now, it's blown out the waters.
And what happens is the closer you are in proximity to whiteness, you're able to weaponize it against other people. It reminds me a lot of Rachel Dolezal, who, masqueraded as a Black woman. It really did open up many more doors of conversations around it, but it's still wrong. It's still not fair, because she will still ultimately have a privilege that I, as a Black trans woman, would not begin to have.
What's interesting is that we're talking about race and gender, or as we probably like to call it on our side, sex. Race actually has a more understandable structure for people being transracial. Race does actually exist on a spectrum. I'm biracial. Many perceive me to be Black, even though I am also half white and half Black. We label people like President Obama as a Black president, even though he is as well. Race has never had binary markers. It does exist on a spectrum. Gender, however, does have binary markers. As much as we try, as much as we change the way that we self-present, chromosomes are not going to change.
Okay.
And that's just a reality.
All right, I'm going to bring up a little point here, because you talked about the binary side of gender.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was born a little of both. I believe I've never had my chromosomes checked, but since I fathered 2 children, I'm assuming I have the correct male chromosomes. So I was intersexed, and there's a lot of reasons that happens, none of which are well studied or understood, but a friend of mine in the
Intersex, but he never had his chromosome checked. What's going on here? What are we watching?
pediatric trauma world says about 1 in 150 kids come out with some degree of ambiguity in their gender. For me, that appeared as always feeling out of place. And for the first week of my life, I was in the surgical wards at.
Listen, there's some people that confuse me. There's some people that I'll see, and then I'm pretty sure it happens with a lot of us. You'll be like, oh, that's a man. But him right here, no. There's no mistake. There's no, I was born both. There's none of that. You couldn't pay me to believe.
Naval Hospital in San Diego, getting pieces of me cut off. So, and then they gave me testosterone for the first 11 years of my life. I wish the world were truly sexually binary. It would make it so much easier. But there is a little bit of a smear. And, as a trans person, I'm a very conservative trans person. I don't see the huge gender spectrum that a lot of people in the trans community do. Do I feel better having transitioned? Yes, absolutely. I used to live in a little shell, very large shell, but now I'm much more open about who I am. Is that the only thing that generally defines a woman? No, I don't think that is the only thing that generally defines a woman.
Right. I think there are a lot of women who.
If we're gonna go off the basis of what defines a woman, and you're trying to say things that also define men, that's possible. But there is distinctive characteristics that define women that does not define men. Period. They're saying things like, oh, you have to be strong. You have to do this. Things that can blend in with both men and women. Yes, we know this. We have similar things that go on with men and women. Yeah, but there's also things that define women that does not define men. Men cannot be pregnant. Men do not go through that time of the month. we have different chromosomes. Like, stop saying things that equal both. They're purposely doing that. You know what I mean? Like, let's talk about the things that can't be changed here.
Maybe on our side of the argument who will try to maybe invalidate your experiences by saying you can't give birth or you can't have a period. And while those things may be true, I'm sure there's a lot of other different struggles that you all are going through. And yeah, I would truly believe that you probably are highly discriminated against in our society, and it is hard to you. It is hard to go through the things that you go through and have to deal with some of the responses that you get from people. And you know, it's not a struggle that I would wish on myself at all.
Not a struggle I wish on my worst enemy.
Trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
I do think that trans women have every right to compete in women's sports. When trans women are on hormones, the hormones break their body down. Having gender affirming surgery breaks down the body. And so,
First of all, let me just interject. I knew he was going to be the only one sitting down. How did I know it?
I think we really need to be educated before we jump to a conclusion that trans women are stronger than cis women in sports. Hi, everybody.
I find it interesting that you assume the people who disagree with you are uneducated. And I will speak out against that. I think the research shows that trans women do happen to have a biological advantage against biological women. Even though you are taking hormones and that does start to change your body and level things out, we're talking about primarily people who have transitioned post-puberty, which means they do have male bone density, male wingspan, male hand size, feet size, lung capacity. All of these things are going against women, biological women, when trans women start to enter their spaces, their sports, and compete against them. And this is really concerning for me.
I think for me, it's not a question of whether or not trans women can compete in sports. It's a question of how can we change the institution of sports in this country to make it equitable and to create more opportunity for cis women,
People need to
for
start showing
trans
up.
women. And like, that's kind of like why I wanted to actually ask you all, like, what has your relationship to sports been?
I don't think you have to have a direct relationship to sports to realize that women are being affected by this issue. And I do reject the idea of equity. There is no way to come about an equality of outcome, which is what equity is saying. There's a reason that women's sports are less funded and less watched than men's sports. It's because men seem to excel athletically and they seem to press the bounds of athleticism way farther than women do. We now exist on a slippery slope. If it's female sports, is it then female locker rooms? Is it then female prisons, which we're now seeing becoming an issue here in California, where biological male inmates are being put in female facilities because they identify as women?
Didn't, maybe somebody can answer this in the comments. Wasn't there a trans woman that went to jail and was put into the female facility and impregnated another cellmate? Am I tripping, or that's something I'm gonna have to look into it? That's something I heard or I seen. People gonna be having babies in jails.
We have to discuss as a society how much we give into the feelings of wanting everybody to be accepted and how much we are willing to do that at the expense of biological women.
I use myself as an example. This is about how big I was in junior high school and
Oh wow, so that did happen. I know I wasn't tripping.
early high school. I used to be able to walk up to a V8 engine block, pick it up off the floor and set it on a table. And if I was in powerlifting or weightlifting, that amount of, that advantage was just unbelievable. I've been on hormones for 15 years. Did it weaken me? Absolutely. Did my bone density really hasn't changed? My muscular hasn't changed. And this is not a binary question. There's a lot of nuances involved.
I just want to ask a question for what you were saying. Can you throw out some statistics?
I don't think you need to have there's an abundance of research. There's even trans activists who agree with exactly what I'm saying. And your hormones can change, right? And even she just spoke to the fact that her bone density did not change in going on hormones and changing these things.
Yeah.
And we can see it in sports as we're watching them. Leah Thomas is a great example.
So if you can't throw out the
Oh wow, she called him a she. Interesting.
statistics, we're not doing enough of the work. And let's also be
disagree.
clear, there are some cisgender women who produce high levels of testosterone as well. And so we really have to unpack it from all different sides here.
Can you produce statistics about the bone density of biological men and how it changes upon being on hormones and whether or not it levels out to biological women?
I actually cannot, because when I would think of those statistics, I would think it was BS, to be quite honest with you, because the reality of it is we could talk about statistics and the research all day long, but it's about experience. We're going to be looking more at the experience, because again, when we look at cisgender women who produce high levels of testosterone and who have been kicked out of sports, and been disqualified from teams based on something that they biologically cannot control, then what are we really talking about here?
Well, we're talking about, data and that is overwhelming. And we're talking about what is also we're capable of seeing with our human eyes. I think it's very clear that if you compare maybe you to the rest of us, there is going to be a strength difference. There's going to be a
You don't
bone
know
density
that.
difference.
But you're just saying that you don't know until we physically do something, and just perceiving and assuming just because I look a certain way, that's not fair. Me and her we could look completely different or whatever, but she may be stronger than me.
I agree, but
she have much more agility and vitality than I do. We don't know that until you actually do it.
I'm
until
saying
you
that
actually
it has
experience
been
it.
studied, it's been done.
And it's been done. We've seen it
But
numerous
it's an
times,
assumption.
time and time again.
But we're only going on assumption at this point.
Why does he keep saying assumption and assume, and you don't really know that if it doesn't fit his narrative? Ugh. Anything that he does not agree with, he's gonna say, "Well, you don't really know that. We don't think that that's real." Anything.
Because again,
It's not assumption when
Science.
we see it. Maybe it's the news cycle that I watch.
We've seen that UFC fighter, a couple different UFC fighters who were trans women, tearing up women in the UFC ring, tearing them up. We seen what Leah Thomas was it, the swimmer who was just. I think that's what the girl was talking about too when she was talking about the wingspan and the hands. Leah Thomas is huge. Who was placed 100 and something place in the men's swimming, but got into the girls swimming and placed first place. You see different women coming out, different people on the news saying that this is unfair. Come on. Is this man not watching what's going on in the world? Or is he just being completely hidden? Because believe it or not, your algorithm can hide you from the truth. If you're watching things that fit your narrative, your algorithm is going to be nothing but filled with things that fit your narrative and fit your truth. That's the dangerous thing about the internet, for one. Because your algorithm can completely lie to you and have you in a complete bubble.
But I see it a lot. I see it quite often where they're showing trans women beating. I'm by far.
And you don't see women
Biological women.
dominating in the men's sports, right? You don't see trans men going into men's sport and just completely dominating and wiping the field with them. This is what happens when you, in my opinion, twist God's design. And when you
That is so true. You don't see trans men going into men's sports and dominating it. Wow, I haven't even thought about that.
go against God's design, you create these problems that you wouldn't have if you weren't going against what God intended.
I'm going to take her side a little bit on that. Let me say one more thing, and I'm supporting you on this one. There's a great deal of women that, and actually there was a lady in the last Olympics that they actually disqualified until she went on androgen blockers to knock her testosterone down to a female level. Like I said, this is not a binary yes or no question. And the whole idea of messing with what, God puts up, God put me up, okay, if you want to take that. And I had this conversation with a very religious man in San Diego, and he was like, oh, I don't quite know how to deal with that.
And God made you that way, but he didn't make a lot of the people transition.
I understand.
No, but God also
or
understands my transition. God, first of all, knew what I was going to be in my life. God already knew I was going to be trans when God put me here. So I
why
don't think
didn't
it's
he make
fair.
you?
I don't think it's
Okay. They keep trying to blame God for things that they've come into agreement with. There's many people who have been set free from the homosexual spirit. There's many people who have been set free from all kind of things. I've been set free. Listen, I could have stayed in my lifestyle completely, just out here running wild, hustling, slanging, and saying, God knew I was going to be this hustler when he put me here. That's how a lot of people's mindset is like that. God knew I was going to be this player when he put me here, when he put me in my environment, when I was raised around gangbangers and drug dealers. God knew who I was going to be. That's why he put me here. That's where I'm at now. No, you don't have to be what your environment is. You're not a product of your environment. You're a product of your mindset. We come to the Lord and be set free from all those things. We don't have to stay in that bubble. But when you choose to, you think like this, and you come into agreement. You come into agreement with the enemy, which is the worst thing you can do. Coming into agreement with that does not set you free. That just prolongs your pain and brings you into temporary pleasure. Come out of that, my friend, and whoever else is in it, come out of it.
It's fair when
Female.
people dip and dab. Your relationship with God is personal.
Yes.
It's sacred.
Let's
And
keep
I
it
don't
there.
think it's fair when other people dib and dab in other people's relationship with God when they don't understand what they go through. God still blesses me as a trans woman. God blesses you as a cisgender woman. God is embodied in me as a trans person. I don't think it's fair, again, when we judge people's personal relationship with God. Gender identity, sexual orientation, none of that matters to a God that loves all.
Gender dysphoria is real.
Well, first of all, saying that doesn't matter to God is a complete lie. God wants all of us to come into a place where we become children of the Lord through Christ. Do not get it mixed up, okay? Everyone is not a child of God. Everyone is not a child of God. We become children of God through Christ, through Yeshua, who was sacrificed for our sins. But God wants us to step into that purpose. God wants us to step into that place where we can begin to receive our inheritance from the Father. But when we stay and come into agreement with things like this, we are staying in a spiritual, but we're staying in spiritual bondage to the enemy. We're exactly where he wants us to be. Even the world, people who aren't in things like this, but they're just caught up in the world. They're caught up in their goals. They're caught up in the TV they watch, the music they listen to. They're stuck in bondage too. They're stuck in bondage too. Just like these trans are stuck in bondage, just like people who are dealing with different sins are stuck in bondage. People who don't know God are stuck in bondage too because of their environment, things that they see. Only difference is this is more abnormal, so we don't really think of it like that. But truth is, all of them are in bondage. All of them are in a space that God wants us to come out of. Right? So what we have to come to the understanding is where true freedom is. Right? The word of God says, for whom the Son sets free is free indeed. And people want freedom. People want love. But many don't understand that God is love. They think, a lot of these people think that getting their way and acting off of their emotions is love. That's why they'll say things like love is love. Okay, well, what's love? Love is love. Okay. Well, what's love? Well, love is love. It's a full circle that you're never going to come out of until you find God.
I think it is obviously real because many people experience it, but like any kind of dysphoria, whether it's someone who thinks they're overweight or anything, I think it should be treated as not reality. Like if I thought I was obese, I wouldn't want to go to a affirming therapist to tell me, yes, you are obese and you should, get skinnier.
So I had the opportunity of working on the DSM-4, I think it was, when we actually declassified transgender dysphoria from a mental illness to a condition. I had been, at that point in time, I'd been cross-dressing for 50 years. And, because that dysphoria was there and every single thing I did to try to drive it away didn't work. I spent millions of dollars trying to be the coolest dude in the world. I bought airplanes, I bought everything that I could to just show the world how masculine I was. It didn't work. It didn't go away. And I did therapy. I purposely went to a therapist that was anti-gender affirming. And literally he said, you need to do this, and because it was so deep seated. Spent 6 weeks as Gina with my son. And at the end of that period of time, he asked two very fundamental questions. The most important one was, it's got to be truly exhausting for you to lead two lives. And I was kind of like, that kind of shook me to the core that my 22-year-old son saw that better than I did. So shortly thereafter, I announced to my family that I was going to transition. My wife and I separated because of it. The kids were not necessarily shocked, but understood and have supported me quite well. And my wife has actually become a very good, very warm, supporting person for me.
Gender dysphoria almost
he's
made
still
me kill
married.
myself. And coming from Mississippi, at the time, there wasn't a lot of access to gender affirming resources like hormones, if I wanted surgery, whatever the case may be. And a lot of us trans folks who don't have access like that, a lot of us have to do sex work to be able to afford some of these things as well. Me coming up at the age of 20, and I knew I had a serious gender dysphoria, I did things to my body that I should have went to a hospital to do. That is something that's very, very hard for people to understand. A lot of us commit suicide because of gender dysphoria. And so it hits our community a lot harder.
I do think gender dysphoria.
Guys, when you have feelings inside of you that you can't control and they're just taking over you, you are in a place of possession. These people don't even realize that, because a lot of these people don't know who the Lord is. But when you are in a place where you can't control what you are doing and you start hurting yourself, listen to me. There's people out here who identify as handicapped, and they are paying doctors to take away their limbs. They're paying doctors to move different parts of their bones so that they walk with a limp. You telling me that that's okay because they identify as handicapped? No, they have spirits in them that is controlling them. They are in a place of possession that they need to come out of. Same for these people. This might not be that on that level, but compared to a different level, this is that level. It's possession. Lord, set the captives free.
Dysphoria is very much real. I think the issue that's happened, especially in the space of science and research, is that we've looked at gender dysphoria and said the only source of care that we can go through is blind gender affirmation care. And a lot of the research shows that this is not the route to go into. And other countries that have decided to do nonpartisan research, Sweden, Finland, have decided that yes, gender affirmation care should be an option, but it really should be the last resort when it comes to treating people who appear at clinics with gender dysphoria. You know, a lot of conservatives will deny and say, well, gender affirmation care does not make them happier. And in many cases, that is true. But there are the cases like yourselves where the gender affirmation care does make them happier.
You know, I know a lot of people that have transitioned, have untransitioned. I've talked with a gentleman at a religious right convention one day, and he was sitting there screaming how Jesus got him out of his gender transition. And
Amen.
honestly, that was the saddest man I've ever talked to in my life. When I looked at him straight in the eyes and I said, you know, here, I don't agree with what you say, but I 100% support your right to say that. And he just literally broke down crying on the steps of the Supreme Court.
If I could interject really quickly, I do.
No, absolutely not.
I feel as though the medical profession is actually inching towards a space that is going to become unsafe for people who try to express their gender dysphoria, because now we have young children coming into clinics expressing this, who by and large, statistically, about 60 to 70% grow out of that dysphoria. But because it's become a political issue where many activists have come in and say, no, you blindly affirm, you affirm to the furthest extent that you can, rather than going through a more comprehensive process with these children, we have what I think is a medical tragedy happening against young people in this country.
I have been sexually harassed.
So, what's interesting to me is when you start thinking about, different ways that these people try to come out of this, and this goes for everybody who is like in bondage and in a place where they're stuck. A lot of these people, they've tried different things, therapy, counseling, different things. But when you are caught in a spiritual battle, many people don't even understand what a spiritual battle is. In order to come out, you have to go in spiritually. But how will people know that unless God's children actually rise and start being voices instead of just taking a back seat and looking at things that's going on in the earth? No, those times are over, because us taking a back seat is the reason why things are in such a loop now.
Sexualized everyone and everything, and I think we owe a lot of that to pornography and just media. And I think the kind of acceptance that I do see more so in the LGBT community of sex is great and let everyone talk about it and there's no shame and everyone's just blurting out the fact that we're perpetuating a culture that's, frankly, in my opinion, disgusting.
So are you talking specifically about LGBT people?
I'm talking more so just about this sexual revolution, that the more sexual you are, the more partners you have, the more open you are about your sex life and everything, the more liberated you are. What is consent? People are coming out of the woodwork saying, I was violated, this happened to me. But they drove home with that person. And I'm not blaming them, but I am saying those lines are being blurred because of our just flagrant disregard for any kind of actual relationship prior to the sexual encounter. And I think a lot of people are being exploited left and right.
True sex positivity has been powerful. It has helped us to grow and learn about our bodies in so many ways and learn safe sex practices in so many ways. What I would blame for rape culture or for a lack of good boundaries or that kind of thing is we live in a capitalist system that has taken things like sex positivity and mangled it and repackaged it and made it a whole other thing than what it actually is.
I was sexually harassed for 5 years by a woman. That does happen because I'm pretty sure it's going to be we're men this, men that. It's hard coming from a man, but to me it was harder coming from a woman because it wasn't expected. I understand you're going to probably touch on that about how men are more on the predatory side or the more harassing side sometimes. But I just want to let you know that it does happen with women as well.
All through my life, world's biggest kid in junior high school, I basically was harassed continuously for being gender nonconforming. Back then, everybody in junior high school took showers together. I basically had a permanent welt on my bottom from people snapping towels at me because, I wasn't as well endowed as I probably should be. I had, pretty good sized boy boobs and basically was just unhappy being in sports. But, it happens everywhere. I have been sexually assaulted and it didn't work out well for any of them. It's real. Let me just put it that way. It's absolutely real.
Yeah, I think it'd be hard to find a person who hasn't been sexually harassed in some way, shape, or form, whether you are male or female. I think it's an experience that we all share because we are in somewhat of a hypersexualized society, and people love to make those comments public. I am a podcaster and I do social media for a living, so as you can imagine, the onslaught of sexual harassment is quite vast.
From a very young age, I've had this recurring nightmare of something happening to me, trying to warn people, and no one believes me. When you're not believed that you're a desirable person, and I really don't think rape has anything to do with desire, but when you're not believed in that way, when trans women are experiencing trans misogyny, we're the ones who are least believed when we are sexually assaulted. And it just feels so disempowering and so terrifying when you know that you are someone who is seen as hypersexual, as inherently sexual, as inherently predatory, and yet at the same time you're seen as someone who can be isolated and sexually assaulted and not believed.
I don't think there's anything inherently predatory about trans people. And I think oftentimes when we're talking from a conservative perspective, it gets misconstrued as viewing you as a threat. And I hope that that never comes off. And I think that allegations of sexual assault, regardless of who they're coming from, should be taken seriously.
Moral of the story is many people are in a place where, you know, they're held captive. You know what I mean? And it's getting to a place where it's just being consumed with evil. Even the LGBTQ has added the S to the end, which is Satanist. You know, so it's just time to dig deeper, guys. Time to go deeper with the Lord, go deeper and have the Lord's light shine through you and be a trumpet for God. You know what I mean? Because we are in that time, guys. We're in that time. But yeah, you guys, that was sent to me, so wanted to watch that with you guys. You guys have any more videos? Let me know in the comments. For those asking where you can support at, go to patreon.com/Isaiah Robin. Subscribe. We also have clothing line at godlyvibes.com. You guys, everything that we make here goes back into the kingdom of God. Amen. Yeah, you guys. Till next time, I love you guys. God bless. Shalom.